Welcome to Listen In. I'm Brian Gahan, and this podcast focuses on the stories that are buried deep inside all conversations. Be it the kind of conversation you have with someone whose life experience is full of interesting POVs and insights, or the kind of conversation you have inside your own head around your own life experiences. Today, in episode 4, I'm going to be talking with Edward Zaski, a seasoned audio producer, sound and music composer. I love talking with people like Eddie because their careers are so fascinating, hugely unique, but they still remain mostly invisible. Listen in while we unpack Eddie's world of commercial music and sound composition and get a sneak peek into his creative process, loves, inspirations, and what he calls the suffering. Hey, Eddie, welcome to Listen In.
Thank you, Brian. Thanks for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. I've always wanted to talk to you about your profession because you have a unique one, I should say.
It is not the normal profession. I write music for television, radio, commercials, work with artists. I do quite a bit of all kinds of different things, but mostly centered around music and audio production.
How did you get to this point? How did you end up, being a guy who's making music as a career?
I think it started out as a teenager who was interested in music. And it was just the interest that kind of kept me coming back to it, being in bands, being fascinated by instruments, building a couple guitars when I was young. And it's kind of just a natural progression. I went through high school, was always involved with the different stage bands, different ensemble work, and helping other people play, and also having bands that I was playing with at the time. And it was just a lot of fun. We were playing and getting marks, and it seemed like the right thing to do. And then eventually we ended up, having bands outside of school, and we were playing and doing a little bit of gigging, and it was just a lot of fun. And then the day came when I was looking at universities, and I thought, oh, you know what, I might actually want to take this a little more seriously. And at that point, I was already at the Royal Conservatory doing classical guitar. But my parents were interested in me going to university, and this was just a way that I could get to do something that I really loved.
So tell me about building guitars. You said, I built some guitars when I was in high school.
The first thing we tried to do, my father and I, when I was younger, I was really influenced by Brian May and the group Queen, and I'm very glad to see how popular they've once again become. But he built his guitar with his father when he was young, and that guitar has survived his entire career up to this date, and it's probably one of the most recognized guitars for tone and looks out there. And I thought that would be great. I want to do that. But my dad had shop skills, and I had a desire to have a guitar. So together we built something that looked kind of like it, but as we got further into it, we realized it was actually a little more than we were anticipating. So we put it on the side and took a look at it, and we high-fived and said, I think maybe it's time to try something else. And about that time, I realized you could buy parts, and you could buy pickups, and you can buy necks, and you could actually customize an instrument and build it out of the things that you would like to have a guitar built out of, and have it turn out actually quite great. So I have a couple here in my studio that I use quite often.
Oh, that's so cool. So you still are using those guitars?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've got a soft spot for them, too, because they've seen probably the most painful part that a musician's going to put on them is while they're learning to play the instrument. So I've kind of, they've been tortured over the years, and they've seen a lot of rough treatment, and they're still in great shape.
Oh, that's amazing. It reminds me of that movie. Did you see the movie Surf's Up, where it's the animated movie where the penguins surf?
Yes.
And then they have to make Zeke, I think his name was Zeke. Cody, you got to make your own board in order to understand how to surf properly. You've got to make your own board. So with you, it was like I have to make my own guitar in order to be able to understand how to play this guitar.
You don't have to know how to make a guitar, but the more you know about it, the better off the experience will be, because then you get a little closer to it. It's not just a thing you pick up. You realize you can change things. There's certain things about certain guitars you like, and you can get exactly what you want, or something even closer. It's because it's not always easy to get exactly what you want straight off the shelf.
Well, I'm sitting in your studio here, of course, and it's surrounded by an amazing number of instruments, but predominantly the hero instrument in this room is the guitar.
There are a few guitars, yes.
And so is that your instrument of choice?
The guitar has always been my instrument of choice. I've got the most experience on it. I mean, I have keyboards and drums and things like that. Just going back to Queen, I remember the evening at a cousin's house where he had an album that was given to him by somebody who didn't enjoy it. And it was a Sheer Heart Attack album by Queen. And I was listening to a little bit, and I heard a few songs, Killer Queen being one of them, and a few other things that just made me stop and go, wow, what is that? Because there's all kinds of rock music out there, but it was just so unusual, and it was unique, and it caught my ear, and I became a full-time fan on that. When I had heard the sounds that he was coming up with, I had not heard that before, and I thought, geez, I think I have to take a look at the guitar a little more seriously. And so I found a guitar in the basement, started playing it. Couldn't do anything really significant. Eventually, I think somebody taught me a couple chords, and but then, as with anything, there's a learning process. You learn, it's up. Actually, the first time you pick it up, it seems like a snap, like it's going to be a breeze, and you might keep that for first few lessons if you're doing it that way. But then suddenly, you're going to have this point where you're realizing, oh my God, this is the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. And that's where a lot of people get stuck for one reason or another. It could be the guitar isn't set up properly, or they're just not getting the information the right way. But if you get past that initial resistance, then there's this burst where suddenly it's like, oh, and you have all these aha moments, and light bulbs are going off left and right, and you get into it. And then you start to really appreciate it, and you start looking for new things. You start looking at other instruments, and then it's just a downward spiral there. And next thing you know, you've got closets full of cases hiding underneath the bed.
To somebody who's not a musician, I'm always, like a spoiler alert, we've worked together for years. You've created so much music for me. I was trying to think about it the other day, and it must be in the hundreds of sound bites.
Easily.
Yeah. Of different genres, different sounds, different instrumentation, different lengths, different, purposes. I mean, that's the thing that I'm fascinated by. And I think a lot of people, when they think of musicians, they think of, the performers, the artists, the bands, their favorite musician who's working in a genre and is producing, a type of music. And if, you think of someone like Dylan, who, when he went acoustic and the roof almost blew off of his reality, you're jumping around from all different genres.
I mean, when he picked up his electric.
Yeah. Sorry, when he went electric.
Yeah,
sorry.
that was quite something.
Yeah. So tell me, how do you see music? Like you were saying, like, you were listening to something and you were hearing something you hadn't heard before. To the non-musician out there, what is it that you hear?
For him, first off, it was tone, which everybody talks about. Tone, I have the tone, I'm tone searching. There was something unique going on there just because of the way he had things set up. He, instead of using a pick, he would use a coin and use the serrated edge for attack. And that was kind of exciting. And most importantly, he just had a gift for picking the right notes. Like Brian May's got a gift for putting together, orchestrating very clever ideas that don't sound overly complicated, but are just brilliant to listen to. And I'm still, after being a fan for so long, I still listen to certain tracks and I just roll my eyes and I go, oh my gosh, how is that possible? But the funny thing about it, and I've been talking about the gear a lot, about the guitar and the amps that he used, not so much, but I just remember recently reading, because Queen's getting a lot more going right now as far as, they got the movie out, which I thought was great. And my kids actually came to me and said, when you go see it, please take us. And I was so proud and so pleased that they actually managed to track down Queen. Then I sat back with them and fed them a bunch of deep tracks. Now they're huge Queen fans. Mm-hmm. But what I read in a magazine recently, and I've heard this before too, is when they've had other people that have gone on stage during sound check, and the guy who's working the tech would say, like, if usually from a magazine, would say, give it a try, give the rig out a try. And they'll get on it and they'll spin a couple blues riffs or the things that they're comfortable in playing, which they've played 300,000 times at home. Now they're playing it on Brian May's concert rig. Like, this is it. And the thing is, it doesn't sound like Brian May at all. It sounds like that person banging on those riffs. And it just comes down to it that, you can have the most incredible setup and the most amazing guitar and all the fantastic effects that you could ever have. In the end, 85% of what's going to come through the speakers is going to be you. And that'll be you. That'll be unique. And that'll be a voice that nobody else can have. And it certainly takes a long time to get there. But that's one of the truisms, that you don't really need a lot of stuff. As I sit here with a lot of stuff around me, it doesn't hurt to have a lot of stuff, and having a lot of stuff's nice. But your technique, your hands, and of course the ideas in your head are the ones that are going to take you the furthest.
You were sharing with me earlier that you're starting to write your own original music again after probably a number of years where you've been working in the commercial field, more of a hired gun, so to speak. What's that process like for you to go back to creating your own sound?
Well, the great thing about it is there is a lot of ideas that I have that I've been kind of sitting on. And I've been writing music for over 25 years, and it's gone from television shows to series work, lots of cartoons. There's been, and honestly, I've lost count of how many commercial projects I've done and industry films, but I wager to say I'm well over 1,000, and I could probably prove that very easily. But a lot of times when you're working on these things, you get so invested in the project, even if the project only is going to last for 2 or 3 days, or if it's going to last a month, you dig right into it. You're putting everything you've got into it, and you don't really want to kind of start drifting away, even though it's very easy for me to. But along the way, a lot of times you're writing and you pull up an instrument or you grab an instrument and you're just kind of flushing out your ideas and, clearing your mind. And then suddenly something will pop out and it's not really what you wanted for what you're working on, but you go, gosh, that was really interesting. I'd like to save that. So you cast it off to the side and make an MP3 and you throw it in the bin. And, if you can remember about it when you're done the project, you go back, take a listen. And I've got just so many of these things where I just kind of stop and go, that's a great sound. Ooh, that's a great riff. Ooh, that's a really interesting combination of chords or a progression or something. And you commit it to a recording and you save it. Like right now on my iPhone, I have over 600 voice memos, and they're all about creative ideas. So I still have to go through most of them, but they're just always there. It's just finding the time to take all those ideas and make something out of it. And just recently, I decided that, maybe I should just sit down for a couple of days and just write something that I really wanted to write, and not really knowing what it would be. While I was, have been going along, there's sounds that I like. I love the sound of handheld percussion. I love the sound of glass instruments. I love the sounds of prepared instruments, piano, guitars, sticking things under strings so they rattle and make unusual sounds, and just strange found sounds. Like, those are the kind of things that I get really excited about. But for most of the time, I can't use any of these types of ideas because I can't sell stuff the way it needs to be sold. So I just started getting into this thing, and I'm writing through it, and it's a lot of fun, but it's a little bit scary when there's so much material to work with. And having been in the industry for so long and having got to work with so many different people on so many types of projects, whether it's, like heavy rock, whether it's full orchestral, hybrid orchestral, electronic, all these elements are available. All these types of styles are available, and I'm pretty comfortable with them. So there's a lot to draw on, and then obviously it takes a lot of time to kind of sort yourself out and decide and lay down the ground rules as to what you want to make happen, because the thing's got to start and the thing's got to end, and it's got to make sense somehow in between.
Yeah, and I remember you with a lot of the projects that we've worked on together. You'll, sometimes we're always in advertising, we're stuck with, limited time, and it'll be like, but I need some time for this to go somewhere, or for this to become something, right?
Are you referring to the suffering? We have 48 hours to get final client approval, and we'll have the picture to you tomorrow. Yeah, there is the suffering where you're just kind of trying to figure out what exactly it is you want to do. But then on the flip side, then you start having, a cognitive disinhibition where, you hear about something, you sit down and start working, and while you wrote that track, you actually came up with 2 other really good ideas that you wrote in the background. And so that's how you can catch up on the schedule.
So let's just take a step back and describe to me what your profession has been over the last 20 years as if you had to, write it on a bank form for a loan or whatever, what would you say you are? Are you a commercial composer? Are you a music composer? Like, what would you call yourself?
An audio producer.
So an audio producer.
Yeah. Yeah.
But does that not, to the lay person, to someone even myself who has a bit of insight into what that might be, I go down more audio engineering, I go more down to sound management. I don't think of composition.
Well, that's what's kind of one of the reasons why I think that I'm still around doing this is that you can come out of some of the great colleges that are here in Toronto that can give you a leg up, give you a solid education. Just as, I went to York, got music covered, then I went to college and got all the production aspect covered. And I popped out and I just kind of walked into like a really fortunate series of events I came in through Sounds Interchange, got to work in post-production, learned just so much. And the thing is, it wasn't kind of take your time and learn it. It was all like, seat of your pants, this is on fire, it's got to be done for the morning. And you learn a lot that way, and made a lot of friends who moved on to other places, and eventually I caught up with them, and they were engineers, and I got to be assistant engineer, and that went on for a while. And then you start doing a little bit of engineering, and then you're doing sound design for things, and suddenly somebody is unavailable to write a piece of music, and they said, can you take a crack at it? And or a number of tracks have been written for this and it's not working out. Do you want to take a stab? And it works out. And so suddenly you find yourself, a year or 2 later in a studio behind a console, recording the voiceover for a commercial that you wrote the music to and did the sound design to, and you're recording the announcer, you're doing the mix, and you're flying it out the door, and it's done.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. So like there's all, it's better to have many hats in this, like doing Foley. I love doing Foley. I love doing sound effects. Lately I've been doing a lot of sound effects because they're kind of sound effects driven movies, but I also do the music as well. Right. And yeah, so it is kind of fun to be able to actually sit down, look at the picture, hear the voices, see everything that does need to be looked at, and then talk to the director, say, okay, this is what I'm thinking. And so much of it happens virtually now. It's incredible. And just spot the thing and move forward. And it can move really quickly.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's the part where, there's all these people on this earth that do stuff and jobs that people are like, how do you do that? Or how did that happen? Or how did you get there? But I mean, there's not a ton of people like you around, I would imagine, that can do everything from soup to nuts when it comes to this.
There are a lot of talented people in Toronto, for sure. It's just whether you've got the balance of all the elements that you can pull it together. And, and it's also a pricing thing too. Mm-hmm. Like the cost, because I run my own shop. And when it has to be, it's a one-stop shop. It's not always. A lot of times, like I've written music for all kinds of sound effects companies and music companies in the city and outside of the city. And right there, after you finish writing the music, you supply all of the elements as separate stems. If you have players come in that can play here, record them, mix those elements into the session that I send them, and then they just open it. And as far as I'm concerned, and the rest of it's none of my business. As long as they're happy, as long as their mix goes down, as long as they I guess send me the check. It's done. Like, whereas other ones where you are doing the mix and everything right here and recording the music, because there's so many, like the growing pains can be huge because first off, the music might require revisions. Sound effects might require revisions, and anybody who's in the industry, the advertising industry, there's going to be tons of revisions. There's going to be lots of little things. Fortunately, I seem to get a pretty easy ride because most people are happy, which makes me happy.
Well, that's just a credit to your skill set and your ability to, solve the problem for people, right? Because that's what it all boils down to. People are coming with, a piece of work or a commercial or a show or whatever it is, and going, like, how can we make this better with some music, some sound effects, some Foley? How can we bring some life into this? And that's your skill.
But at the same time, it's also very much like I call it the wild wild west, because the rules of engagement aren't like your regular office job. There's no HR department. There's nobody to run to when somebody steals your toilet paper riff and sticks it on some other toilet paper, and it's, oh, that's my toilet paper riff. I used that. It was on a demo, but it didn't get taken. But somebody stole my toilet paper riff, and you're like, that's my toilet paper riff. What are you going to do? Who are you going to call? The mayor? Like, nobody. You can call the union, but it becomes a problem. Like, things like that happen.
So you talked about Foley and it being one of your loves, and maybe, let's talk a bit about that. Like, just even describe it to a listener who doesn't even understand what Foley is. And
okay, Foley is one of the it's all fun, but Foley is the replacement of sounds that occur within a movie or a commercial that they could not record on site with microphones and do it quite right. So a lot of times they'll get the voice done really well, so they have a voice. But let's just say if they're sitting at a table, they wouldn't be cutting food on their plates because there'd be clinking and clunking and noise. So they would try to limit that noise so that you would get better voice records. And then somebody afterwards would come in and replace that. So when you're watching, especially outdoors, when you're watching a movie or a commercial, most of the stuff in the outdoors is replaced, and often the voice is replaced as well, just because you want to get the best possible recording to sell it and it looks good. But Foley can be, somebody's taking a big bite out of a cookie, but they want it to be a really big crunch. So you get somebody after the fact to bite into a piece of celery, and if that's not big enough, then they hold a handful of eggs and crush the eggs, and if they want it really, really powerful, you could snap some thin sticks to add a lot of punch to it. So you can have 5 elements combined to this one sound of somebody biting into a cookie. and it's fun.
Yeah. And it's interesting to kind of break sound down like that, to go like, we all know what biting into a sound of a crunchy cookie is, what that would be like in our brain. But then you can go and add all these other sounds like sticks and celery and eggs and whatever, combine them all together, and I'll go, yeah, that's exactly what it sounds like.
Yeah, I recall having done a thing for a muscle relaxant product. And it was a lot of these little wooden characters doing a river dance shtick. And we were thinking, there's no sound effects library that's going to be able to cover that, obviously. Like, we might want to get one nice wooden click, but you just can't map that wooden click across an entire keyboard and play it with samples, because it'll just sound horrible. So I kind of thought, well, what can we do? What can we do? And I remember taking bottle caps and taping them to my fingers and putting them, I treated them somehow so they weren't very metallic sounding. They just had kind of a dead sound. And I took a wood surface. The wood surface was actually more important. And we just studied the dance moves of this whole line of dancing wooden dolls. And we just performed it with our fingertips on this wooden table and recorded it. And you had to EQ it a little bit to get the ting out, but the ting of the metal, which wasn't a problem. But suddenly we're looking back going, I'm buying it. I buy this. This this sounds right. And another good example, sticking things to your fingers. There was this commercial where a dog was running down a hallway and had some very serious heroic moments. But at the same time, there was a drone flying in with salad and delivering it to the family table.
Because that happens.
But yeah, the whole meal was being delivered by drones, and I remember thinking, I need the dog. It's very specific because you can see his paws, And of course, the sound effects libraries don't match up. So it's, hey, Foley time. And we took some marble, a sheet of marble, because if you do a lot of Foley, you might have a lot of things that you like to use around you, but you might also have a Foley pit, which a lot of big studios have, that have a variety of flooring, sand, gravel, and just a whole smorgasbord of things you can use to make strange sounds that are perfect or imperfect. Anyway, so I, once again, taped things to my fingernails. I took paper clips, and I found that if I used the thicker paper clips, I could actually kind of recreate the sound of a dog's paw on marble. Now, there's still going to be dog motions because they recorded the dog, but the nails weren't quite right. But we figured that out, and you look back and you go, yeah, it looks great. Oh, wait a minute, it's missing a bell around his neck. Ding, ding, ding. So you get some keys and you jiggle that, and it looks great. Then you have other situations like this drone crashing, which ends up happening. The food ends up all flying around the dining room, hitting the wall, hitting the table. The drone crashes. And I just remember sitting there looking at that, and we all were looking at each other, and I said, we're going to do this, right? And everybody's there, we're doing this. And so we before we did that, we went to a studio owner and said, we're going to do this. And he's like, yeah, take it easy. But next thing you know, like, we went shopping and got lettuce and all kinds of things that were featured in it, tomatoes. And we ended up, recording, throwing a head of, big chunks of lettuce at the wall and hitting it, splat, dropping tomatoes and dropping spaghetti and making it. And it was just so much fun. And you're sitting back going, I can't believe I'm doing this.
And so you ended up using the real product to make the sound of the real product, which is interesting, right?
Yeah. I mean, we didn't price shop or anything, but we most of the things that happened were just regular like food items. Like, we didn't spend an awful lot of money, but it was a lot of fun to actually make a little mess.
Wow, yeah. Yeah, that's fascinating to think, because I've seen some things online where they showed like the behind the scenes of the Foley work in different movies and stuff like that. And it's always guys with celery and crunching and marbles and all sorts of stuff. But it must also be incredibly challenging when you're forced to come up with that solution of, in the next, half an hour or day or however long you have, please make this sound like it is real.
Yeah, that is, well, there's so much more available now that you can download from the net. Libraries, like I have a huge library of my own, but there's libraries you can sign into, and people have done a pretty good job. Like, imagine the handling of snow and ice. That's a huge thing unto itself. And, you could run outside with a digital recorder and just do your own Foley, knowing what you need. But the problem is there's so much noise from the air, there's dogs barking, there's cars going by, and just the wind. So in some cases, like, sometimes you have to actually, use sound effects libraries. Mm-hmm. But when you can do it's like everything, if you want to program something, you can program it. But if you can get a real drummer, or if you can get a real, bass player, or a real trumpets, real violins, it's expensive, but it's always the best.
Right.
Like,
yeah.
It really makes a difference.
So what's one of the craziest kind of Foley jobs that you've done that's kind of involved studio out of studio all over the place?
A commercial that was running during the Winter Olympics, and in the commercial, they wanted somebody to ski down an escalator. And they wanted us to record it because we all looked at each other. It's always we're all, hey, everybody. We're all looking at each other going, well, that's that. What are we going to do? Pour sand down a rubber bucket and slow it down so it's like. But then there's probably all kinds of like click, 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 click. So what are we going to do? Like some kind of turn locking thing that can click, and you could do something, but the best thing to do is to actually go there and record it. So we all decided we're going to pack up the rig. We're going to go down and hang out. And we had ladders and things like that, because we didn't really know what it was going to be like until we got there. And when we got there, we talked to the production team, and they knew we were coming. And we said, listen, we need to get some mics up there. But because everything's being shot from many angles, we have to find ways of hiding the equipment so it's not obvious. But we need to get our stuff. And then we also found out that the Olympian was only going to be doing it 3 times. That was their contract. They had 3 swings at it, and there was probably no issue about whether they could have done it all day long. But the fact is, like, if you know you can go past 3, you're just going to keep doing it over and over and over.
Yeah, they're going to
So we
take
gotta-
and take.
So the gig was we're doing it 3 times, and at that, once we figured it out, and when all the cameras were set up, I found there was a spot with a really like an extended ladder, which was probably 18 feet or something. I was up behind one of the pillars on the side of the escalator recording it with a boomstick, just out of sight, and the other guy is operating a recording device. And we did that, I think, for one, and we listened back. It was good. And then I found another place, like hiding off to the side a little bit. And so it was kind of like, trying to be sneaky and getting what we needed, because we don't want to wreck their take too, because if we wreck their take, they lose one of theirs.
Right.
So we got what we could at the spot with the girl who was skiing. And then we talked to them. I said, listen, we really want to make sure we got this. So is it okay if we go to the other escalator that's on the other side of the mall that we're in right now, and just try to gather some extra sounds? And they said no, it's not a problem. Like, they talked to management.
Right.
You guys can do whatever you want. So we carted all our gear and a couple of skis over there, and we set up our mics nice and close, and we started firing them down, slowly dragging them down, and just trying all kinds of different approaches to it that would create possibly all the different sounds that would make this thing perfect. Meanwhile, at the top of the escalator is a security guard that wants to kill us, because he's like, I said, no, we're supposed to be doing this. And the guy was just fuming. He went stomping away, and he talked to the production company, and they came stomping back like, what are you doing to my escalators? Like, throwing chunks of wood down the escalators. Who gets to do that? Well, that day we got to do it. And it turned out great. Like, it was a lot of fun.
Wow, it's a very creative way of solving that problem, right? So like I love the visual of like wood flying down an escalator, and it's like, who knows what's going to make the perfect sound until you try. Let me ask you a couple of things around, your creative process when it comes to creating, the music that you do. Like, what's your creative process? If you had to describe it, how would you describe it?
You mean when I get a call and somebody presents the job?
Yeah, when somebody's like, "Hey, Eddie, we've got this, and we need it by tomorrow, or in 2 days, and we want it to be, as they always say, 14 different descriptives that are all contradicting.
I usually ask for at least 5. What would you like it to be? Well, first off, you ask, do you have something? Like, do you have something, a treatment you can give to me so I can kind of get all excited? Because I'm, like, me, I'm a pretty all-in kind of guy. Like, when a project comes in, don't ask me to start it unless you can let me start it, because I'll just go mad very quickly, because I'm just, well, maybe I should start writing it even though I don't know what you want. The first thing is, great, we've got a gig. Let's do a gig. It's going to be fun. It's a gig. And you get a preliminary briefing, or sometimes you get a rough cut of whatever it is, or you might get a part of an episode, or a couple of scenes that just need to be scored to see if you got the right idea. There's all kinds of ways the job approaches you, or just somebody calls you up and said, what are you doing right now? Because I got something that has to be done in 3 hours. Can you do this in 3 hours? In which case, you listen to them very carefully.
Yeah.
And you say, okay, we're not going back, so let's have a quick discussion. Let's see what you need. If you have reference material, it's even better, because at least we know you'll be kind of in the area.
Right.
But anyways, the first thing is always the suffering. And the suffering is that after you hang up and you're starting to receive all the intel about the job through email and through links, you're sitting there holding your head going, oh my God, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? Because there's nothing in your head at this point. You don't really know what you're doing. So there's a lot of anxiety about that, because you want to have stuff in your mind and you want to be moving forward, but there's always this, it's called I know it's not me. I saw a thing with Hans Zimmer and on a series that he does for Masterclass, and he was talking about it, and I was listening to him going, oh, thank you, Hans. I needed to hear that, because like it is real. Like, there's this, how am I going to pull this off?
Mm-hmm.
How on earth, and a lot of times you look at it and you go, yeah, it's not really my thing. But I've done stuff like that, and there's someone, no, you're right, do it, you do it. And you do it, and at the end, you're like, wow, that felt great. But in the initial stages, it can be quite punishing because you got to think about what sounds, sometimes what's going to do the job. Because of deadlines, sometimes you have to, hire a part of an orchestra, not knowing what you're writing, but you have to kind of guess.
Right.
And say,
right.
I need 3 violins, I'll need this, or like, and that's where it can get scary. And you also got to book the singer maybe. And you're booking a singer for something that you haven't written. So you have to take in mind key considerations, range considerations. So it is kind of a very squirrely time of the process where you have to kind of assess what it is that you need to do. But then there comes down to the notes.
Right.
And that's another thing completely where you have to say, okay, like, is this going to be a groove thing? Is it going to be a laid back pacing track? Is it full scoring? Like, does it starts on a sunny morning and families waking up and the sun flows through the window and everybody's smiling and they're having their crunchies, and then somebody smells something bad and everybody's face goes sour and they all look over at the dog and then it's wah, wah, and then the rock track kicks in and everybody gets in their car and everybody's happy again, whatever. Like, you have to address all of these little things, and that can be a lot of work, because it's not just one piece of music that flows along and then kabam, it's over. It has it's growing in different directions, and it's addressing the different characters with their own little themes. It's kind of like working on a movie. Like, in those cases, like, you really are scoring it motion wise too.
But you're scoring like the world's shortest movie, like it's a 30-second commercial or a
Exactly.
60-second spot.
Yes. That's it's funny, but that in itself becomes an art.
Yeah.
Like, the art of being able to try to encapsulate all the things that need to happen in a very short period of time and not make it seem too rushed.
Yeah, or obvious.
Because you want to, you don't want to like hit the thing so hard that it overpowers the visuals, because it's a story. It's always a story.
Welcome back. I'm talking with audio producer Edward Zaski, who is sharing his creative process and how he gets down to the bones of music while navigating what he calls the suffering. Having spent a number of years as a creative, I think that one of the toughest places to be is when you're left with come up with the idea. When everybody in the room looks at you and goes, okay, what should we do? And I think that in your profession, I mean, you're getting that almost every single job, but you're also getting it in isolation because you work pretty much on your own in a studio at that period. I mean, you bring in, other musicians and singers and other people come into the mix, but you're sitting on the end of an email thread or the end of a phone line, and it's like, come up with the idea. And that creative process, for some people, it would destroy them. They wouldn't be able to deal with that stress. How do you deal with that stress?
That's a good question. A lot of times you'll get a project in, you'll take a look at it, and you'll know exactly what needs to happen. And you'll go, because you've done a bunch of tracks. It's kind of like this middle of the road rock track that was popular with a English band a while ago or whatever. It's something that people really, really loved and still love even more today, or an Irish band, what you pick it.
Yeah.
And you can go, that will work for sure. And then you have to remind your client that they're probably going to look at it and go, great, but it's you're not really doing them justice, because they're coming to you, unless they're completely sold. There's a lot of other things you can try. And I had a friend once say this, and I say this now all the time, is this: it's trying to meet the expectations that they have in a unique way, or doing something that was kind of, oh, that really wasn't quite what I was thinking. Mm-hmm. And I think that's when it starts to get really fun. And I think the way things are now is that you can get away with it more than you used to before. But at the same time, it's not really what I want to do. It's just putting the idea out there, saying, I can spin this thing 5 different ways.
Right.
And I'll give you a number system according to the weirdness. Like if you really want to go out there and do something like completely pushing the other way, it could be art. Like it could turn into something else, and maybe that's not what you want. But
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about the process of, when you start out with, they want something that they've heard before. That's what I find the biggest challenge with creativity with a lot of clients is that they want something that's recognizable or sounds familiar to them.
mm-hmm.
But they tell you they want something unique and bold and different. And they give you all these adjectives of something that's really not what they want, but they send you off down that pathway.
Well, that happens on every job pretty much. I usually say, the first thing is I say, do you have a dream? And I'll say, like, has there been something kicking around or a piece of temporary music that you've, managed to suddenly or accidentally fall in love with that's making this thing work for you, or something that means something to you? Like, that's helpful, because first off, I don't want to do something like that and get myself sued.
Right.
But the thing is, like, you can take an idea and go, well, I can listen to that piece of music and I can see why it might be doing the thing that it's doing. But let's not get too close to that thing, because we don't want to have people calling us and asking us why we did it. Because it's,
right.
And that's another thing too, because I have actually done transcriptions for, and just given opinions about, like, just this thing, like, whose music is this? Do you think that they've gone too close? What's your ruling, just casually? And that's a place you don't want to be.
Right. And I mean, this is the part that I find fascinating. And this is the part where, your brain works like this and you think it's normal. And we have these conversations and had these conversations where you'll hand something off to me going, here, Brian, you just do it. And I'll be like, I have no idea what you do. I can't take it from there. And so you're able to listen to a piece of music, whether it's a popular piece of music, that everybody's kind of likes and everybody wants to use, but nobody has, the car budget to pay that band, $2 million for the royalties to use their piece of music in a 30-second spot. But you have the ability to listen to it and say, I know what it is that you're hearing that makes you like it, or in your brain reference it. And I can then take that, whatever that is. And that's the part that I find fascinating. It's kind of like a chef who knows, I know what ingredient is in this salad dressing that makes you love this salad dressing. I know what they've done. And with you can do that with music. And, to describe that to me, like, what is that? How do you break it apart like that to go?
Well, you have to remember, when you're listening to music, orchestral music is the best example, where you have all these instruments playing. But then if you take all the melodies that are intertwined and you reduce the number of instruments that are doubling and harmonizing it, you get rid of the doubles and the harmonies, suddenly you're left with a very, very thin arrangement that has all the important stuff. It's all there, but it's so much easier to have your ear clear it out.
Mm-hmm.
And suddenly you listen to it and it's like suddenly you can hear the individual voices, but now it's not, this massive thing plowing with all these melodies ripping around. All of the fancy stuff gets moved out, and then you can hear the bones, like the absolute bones. Like you can say, you look at the human body, it's just, there's just so much going on. But if you're interested in the skeletal system, if you got rid of everything else, suddenly you can look at it and go, oh,
right,
that's what's going on there. That's how the thing moves around. That's how it gets from here to there. Of course, we need all the other stuff to make it sound the way it's supposed to.
Right.
But there are these basic frameworks that are, in play in all popular music. In blues as a great example. Everybody can spill the blues in different ways, but you find there's certain people that can kind of just take it somewhere else. And being, somebody who listens to a lot of music and it's like, holy smokes, what are they doing? They've gone crazy. Like, they're just putting it together in a way that's brilliant and beyond.
Mm-hmm.
But in most cases, most styles of music can be reduced to some very simple thoughts. Bass line, drums, guitar, not very much trickery in terms of studio. I mean, jazz too.
Right.
Like, if you figure out what you're supposed to be listening to, and it suddenly it makes a lot more sense. Or if you can control yourself enough to listen to the right things as you're going through, and then step back, enjoy the whole thing, but then find what it is that you need, it becomes a different experience.
Yeah, because I remember once you described, Hockey Night in Canada to me, and you said, "Oh, this is what makes the listener believe they're listening to the theme song to Hockey Night in Canada. There's this little thing that happens, and they'll right away think it's Hockey Night in Canada, right? And meanwhile, it's not even close. But people are like, no, that's the song, right?
Yeah, so that can come down to a lot of things like instrumentation. It can come down to rhythm. It's also another thing you want to be careful messing around with that theme, just like,
Yeah.
Hey, like I've done things where there are signature themes associated with a certain sport, and they want to do something like that, and it's like, ooh, we're gonna have to take quite a few steps away,
Right.
to make it a comfortable place. I mean, and it's not saying that you can't get something that will serve it and make you feel like you're there and that it's real, but that's always there. You really have to keep an eye on what you're doing. But being able to identify what it is that makes things stick out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a gift, and the amount of genres of music that you understand, I'm always blown away with just, like you reference music in genres and also in types of bands, in a way that I don't think the average person even thinks that way, right? So how many genres of music would you say that you feel comfortable in, or are you just comfortable in all of them?
I've had a good swing at doing all kinds of stuff. Like I said, I'm having a lot more fun. Like now that I'm actually doing a little bit of my own writing, is mixing orchestral stuff. I'm doing a lot more of that and having a lot of fun with it. But at the same time, like I've got my dobro, and I've got my electric sitar, and I've got my kutiyapi, and all these ethnic instruments. It's fun to have that, just to be able to move around, and interestingly enough, having these other instruments is a fantastic way to keep inspired, because sometimes you get stuck on something. Mm-hmm. You pick up an instrument you have a Les Paul and you've been recording with it, and it's feeling great, but it's just not quite happening. For some reason, you're a little bit stuck. So you pick up a Stratocaster, another very popular instrument, and you play that for a minute, and suddenly the shape of the neck, the tension of the strings, because there are some design issues that are different, suddenly the combination of the woods, you just feel suddenly I feel 5% funky and less rocky.
Oh wow, yeah.
And it's the weirdest thing, because like the different instruments encourage you to play in a different way. I find often, like sometimes, so if you're working on a riff, picking up something else, or just even a bass guitar, or even like a mandolin maybe, play something else, play the same thing. Suddenly something pops open, and the cell is born, and you have the aha, or the what was that, and suddenly you can run with that. Mm-hmm. And you might, and that's part of the suffering when you are under pressure. You need to come up with something. This place that we're sitting in right now looks like a music store after a bombing, or an unsuccessful robbery, because there are literally you have to tiptoe between the instruments, because and my wife will be around. She's like, my God, are you having one of your suffering moments? And I'm like, yeah, yes, I'm suffering greatly now. Please let me suffer alone. And I'll just be cycling through things, getting out different drums, hitting different drums, programming different drums, and then just cycling. And suddenly you pick up a guitar, and you're trying to tune it quickly to get it up to playing, and you realize during that process of just wiggling your fingers around, something happened, and it's there. It took 8 hours to get to the one little wiggly melody or chord progression or something that's now going to make the rest of the project take 2 hours.
Right.
Like, I've there's been situations where you get in a groove. I remember one weekend starting on Friday, and I stayed in the studio all weekend, and I slept there until like the presentation at 10 on Monday morning, and I had to do 12 pieces of music.
Wow.
You know, and but just like after I got that one little twerpy thing, suddenly it was manageable.
Right.
It was manageable. Like suddenly I was like, okay, I'm in. I got the hero thing. I've got that led to a bunch of ideas. Led to a sample collection. I said, yeah, you know what? I've had this sample collection forever. I was wondering why I bought it. Tonight, I'm glad I have it because it's the star.
Right. Yeah. No, that's fascinating. We're sitting in this room full of guitars. So, and one day you told me each of these guitars has a story.
Mm-hmm.
So which one of these guitars today wants to tell a story?
Well, I think I'd like to tell you about my kutiyapi.
Okay, cool.
Yeah,
What is
it's not. It's not a guitar. It's a Filipino lute guitar, a boat lute guitar, and
it looks like a boat. I get
that's what it's all about. Yeah, it's an interesting 2-stringed instrument, and it uses frets that are made out of wax.
Wow.
And the interesting thing about that is between the 2 strings and moving the frets around, you can create different tuning systems. And it's just kind of fun because it's not generally what goes on around here with instruments. You know? So the reason why I have these is a number of years ago, and this is a bit of a story, but I was called by a music company, a music house, about a project about a very serious humanitarian issue that was occurring in the Philippines and also other places in the world. But there was a team that was interested in perhaps trying to bring light to it. And they had a team that were going in and trying to basically build a film about this so that they could make it more common knowledge that these things were happening. And it was very sad. And I was very moved and actually touched by the fact that they asked me that if I would be interested in offering my skills to it. And it seems like there were a lot of other people involved. They had an A-list celebrity who was going to do the voiceover. And that was the start of it. So, we talked about it through Skype with the director, and just the ideas about when it would be delivered and music that they had heard that they'd liked. And we discussed, they were saying that it would be nice to actually have some kind of traditional instruments incorporated in the score, and gave me a few ideas about scores that they had heard before that they thought kind of did the job. And I was thinking, that's fantastic. I love that idea. So once again, being an all-in kind of guy, I thought, okay, I gotta get my hands on some of the stuff. So I started doing research, found out what might work for it, and ended up calling around. I contacted Smithsonian and got a bunch of recordings, really old recordings of Filipino folk songs. They're very sketchy, but they were kind of exactly what I had in my mind as what would be great. Now, mind you, I knew very little about all of this, so to me it was also a huge learning experience. And I thought, if need be, maybe the best thing to do is actually get some of these instruments in the studio and just see what they're all about, and see if I can learn something, and maybe I can learn enough that if I learn that I can't learn, I can always get somebody who can, and they'll probably have instruments too. So I'm very excited about this, and I started to look around, and I found companies here in Toronto that could get them, but they were just ridiculously expensive. And I thought, well, I don't really want to spend that kind of money on these things, but I do want to do something. So it took a while, a number of weeks actually, and I finally tracked down somebody who had family back in the Philippines in a small town in the south, who was a teacher, and she in her town there was a music shop. And when I found out that, I thought, okay, now we're getting somewhere, and this had taken a while to get to this point. What we ended up doing was I spoke to the people at the music shop, and she took all the instruments that were kind of with my description, laid them all together and took pictures of them and started sending them to me. And I would go through them and look at them and kind of try to decide what was the best move. And I settled on 4 instruments that I thought would be appropriate. And then I started seeing other stuff too. And I thought, oh my God, I want gongs. I want this, I want that. And I thought, you go crazy because it's all real and it's authentic and it's exciting. And I certainly am not going to be able to use it to sell toilet paper here, but it is going to be, if this goes away, if it can go this way, I want it to be amazing. So I ended up figuring out how to get them. I circled pictures, sent them back over the internet, and we inked out the deal. They, as it turns out, they were worth only about $50 each, which was great. But then I was faced with the problem of how do I get them back to Toronto? And of course, I was thinking about this before I even started. So at that point, I had already been contacting FedEx, and I received just so much trouble. And people were trying to be helpful, but there was a lot of language barriers that weren't really working out. And I think about 25 calls in, I spoke to somebody who spoke English as well, quite well. And I said, listen, I just going to explain what I'm doing. I want to ship these instruments, and I explained the project in great detail. And she was like, oh my gosh, absolutely, I will help you. And I had this moment going, ah. So there it was. And I started getting emails that the instruments had been put in a large wooden crate with a few extra little treats because they were so excited. It got strapped to some young man's back. He rode it through the forest on a bicycle to another town, Davao town, I think it was, where it was picked up in a small plane. It was by a small bush plane, then flown up to Manila, where it was transferred to a larger jet, and it was flown here to Toronto. And a week and a half later, I get this huge box, shows up, and it was quite something. That was a very exciting moment opening those boxes because there was stuff inside. And then I got these 4 instruments plus a few others. So I let everybody on the team know that I got them, and I started working with them, and I had to prepare them so they'd be studio ready. The tuning would be more stable. I had to figure out the tuning, and I thought, this is great. Now I'm figuring out these traditional folk songs on the actual instrument. And I thought, this is really a lot of fun, and I'm learning like crazy. And slowly, the project started slowing down. Actually, quickly, it started slowing down. And I was kind of looking at it going like, is this going to happen? And they're saying, well, they're taking some time off. Because also what they were doing wasn't exactly the safest thing. The job was treacherous and was with risk. So they stopped, they slowed down, and slowly the project just went away. And here I am with my instruments.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so have you done anything with them since? Is there another reason why they might have shown up?
Well, it was kind of a hard sell, like to try to sell, anything with it, because it is an extremely ethnic sounding instrument. There's no question about it. It's not a guitar. It's not a guitar. You could maybe make a strum stick or a cigar box guitar sound a little bit like it, but it really truly does have its own thing. But this is where the story kind of falls into part 2. I got a telephone call from the same client saying that there's a very popular Canadian chain of coffee shops opening a shop in the Philippines, and they want to do a movie. And they want to do music for the movie. And I'm kind of like, bing, light bulb goes off. And I said, I have like the finest collection available right now. The finest collection. They're studio ready and beautiful. And he says, yeah, I know. So then I saw the picture and I was like, oh, it's a good story. It's a very heartwarming story, and left it wide open to make heartwarming, beautiful music that almost make you want to cry. And I was excited again, finally, I'm going to get to use these instruments. But having gotten started on it and sketching it, I started playing it and trying, because you're not using the same types of melodies or articulations as you would in a folk song. It's a little more cinematic, let's say. I started putting it together, and then I called him and I said, these instruments are going to make this thing sound a little ethnic, right? And I have no problem with that, but I'm just kind of figuring there might be a reaction because they really do stand out in a beautiful way that says, I'm from the Philippines, which is beautiful. But I continued on and scored the entire movie, put it together, and when it was presented, there was quite a bit of backlash, and I anticipated this would happen. Is that they found that the gongs and all the other traditional instruments that I use were just a little too much for the imagery. So understanding this, I wasn't shocked or anything, and I'd already kind of put together in my mind a possible list of things they would have objections with. And first off, I understand, and it's not my job to take them away from their dream. But I asked for a list of things that they thought, and yeah, some of these, the kutiyapi is a little percussive and very bright and very twangy, and that's just the nature of the instrument. I went kind of through it, and at the same time as I was writing it, I was kind of thinking of alternate things. This could be replaced by piano. This could be an acoustic guitar. This could be that. This could be this. So in the end, we ended up a piece that was very similar to the one that I composed for them, which they did like. I did end up having to take all of the Filipino instruments out because it was a little too ethnic sounding, and I agree it was because that's what I went in with. But it ended up sounding just fine, and it was a good project.
But so if I had to sum it up, what you're saying is that the traditional Filipino instruments were too much for this Canadian company who was trying to impress the Filipino people with their movie.
They impressed them anyways because the story, it's like I was saying earlier, you can add all kinds of clever things and show that you're on board, but at the end of the day, if it's taking away,
right,
if it's taking away, then you're not doing the gig. That's
right. So you got to know when to pull back.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I just thought it was so funny. These instruments have been halfway around the world, been dragged on different planes, or ridden on with bicycles. Like they could have their own movie made of trying to make it to the big time to do commercials. Yeah, I still use them. I still every so often because they are neat, and that's the kind of stuff that I like to play with when I have a chance to get out there.
Yeah, well, I'll take some photographs of them and we'll put them on the website so people can see what you're talking about.
Yeah, and actually, as far as the website, that piece of music is on there, and the track that's on there is the track that is the original track that used the kutiyapi and used the gongs and stuff like that.
So you're talking about your website, which I'll put a link to on our website. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, it's on there. So yeah, it's interesting. The instrument has little elbows that pop out here and there, but I tried to make it so you could actually hear the music.
Welcome back. I'm with audio producer Edward Zaski, who shines a light on the incredibly difficult task of fitting the whole story into just 2 seconds of a brand's audio mnemonic. So tell me, if you had to brag, and you can name names, just list off a bunch of clients, commercial works, whatever that your music is in there, and people don't even people don't know, but it's stuff that you've been involved with.
Like brands and things?
Yeah, sure.
Oh God, really, honestly, I think there's not a car manufacturer that I haven't done something like BMW, Lexus, Subaru, Hyundai, Ford, like all the main cars. I've done things, newspapers, lots of beers, lots of beers, wine. Really, when you've done as long as I have, you pretty much get a chance to take a swing at everything. And as people become more educated about music through things like the internet, they're more interested in having new sounds associated with their products.
Right.
Which is a lot of fun. But yeah, it's rare that something comes in and I haven't already done that product, 5 years ago with a different ad agency.
Right. And there is no, like, it's not like you're an actor and you're known as the, the blue light guy or the Budweiser guy, so you can't work for Coors. I mean, your music is
I'm pretty much a ghost.
yeah, and
Yeah.
so you can show up everywhere.
Well, and that's all the thing. I get a call from a music house that is basically going to hero through the track to the end, make it, mix it, and I deal with them trying to kind of decide exactly what it is that they will want. I provide all the services as far as creating it, and they finalize it on the day. And sometimes I show up because there might be an issue that I should be aware of, or to help out in case something doesn't work out or they need an alternate. But yeah, the list is pretty. I really couldn't even tell you, to be honest, because like I just look in my own archive of tracks, like as I have a huge stock library of my own. Because sometimes you write a track and somebody's like, yeah, well, I know I saw this movie last night. Now I changed my mind. I like the theme track from this movie. Can you make it that? And suddenly, okay. And suddenly you're writing 3 tracks, instead of 1, because there's a little bit of uncertainty as to what they want.
Right.
And actually, here's a true story. A few years, and I always, this is one of my favorites, just to say, you think you write something and it's done and that's it. But then you have to start revising it or changing it. And then they hear something else and then you have to really change it. And suddenly it becomes something completely else. And then you find out that or that IDM track you're writing was actually supposed to be opera. And that happens. But there was a company, it was an insurance company that was looking for a logo, a mnemonic, like something to identify them with a 3-second song, a 3-second audio clip that would be used to say their name without saying their name, like Rogers does and so many other companies do. It started, I remember, I think it was in the spring. And a lot of people were writing it because it was a large company. And if you sell one of these things, whether it be bongs or techie kind of sounds or something organic or however they want to spin it, it's a very valuable piece of music because they're going to use it for the life of them unless they decide to change it. So the value of it is immense if they pick yours. And they'd say, you want to throw your hat in, we have a couple $100 to kind of like get you started. So, I came up with, 30. And, and the funny thing is a lot of times, think, it's only 2 seconds long. Well, in fact, trying to say the whole story in 2 seconds is an incredibly difficult thing to do. I mean, you can pick up a piano and go and make a couple dings, or find some synth sound and go boink, boink and say, I'm done. And that's not in most cases going to do it because it has to be unique. And a lot of times it involves making your own sounds, whether it be through found objects or like, if you want a bong, start with the sound of an actual basketball hitting the ground and start building something out of that, or banging 2 pipes together and trying to make a melody. So it can get kind of crazy, or throw a lettuce at the wall. It takes a little bit of effort. It's easy to grind out 50 of them. I'll say it's easy to grind out 50 mediocre ones.
Right.
But I wasn't into that. I thought the kids is good one. I'm going to step out. I'm going to do a good job on it. And I sent out a batch and a bunch of other people. And I think it was beyond the sea. I think there were a lot of people shooting in on it. And but there was a lot of feedback about, okay, we want to try something now more organic. So, suddenly I'm looking around at the instruments I have and the sample collections, and I did that and submitted maybe another 20. And then they said, well, we want to try something that's more family-oriented and something that's kind of funny. So then, there's like the comic aspect to it, that we aren't taking ourselves too seriously. It's going to be silly, zany. So you got, you could try the slide whistle for one. People grow tired of that very quickly, and you get your accordion, and then you get your jaw harp, and you're trying weird things and mixing, like beatbox and jaw harp. Could be fun. Who knows? But you're working on it. You generate another this and that. Now, as it went along, fewer people were getting asked to resubmit. And this now is going over months. And then I was told that I was the only one that was writing.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah, they said, like, just keep at it. Just keep going and keep going. I was like, wow, okay, this is it. This is it. Right? Okay. And I went through everything I'd written, and at this point, there was quite a few. And I said, what haven't I done? Because they're not giving me instruction anymore. And I said, you know what? I'm just going to take a simplest sine wave and put a little bit of a strange reverb on it and just do a series of these really simple beepy kind of things. We've done bongs, we've done melodies, we've done chords, we've done everything that everybody's done, just in a different way. It's going to take a really, really, really simple 3-note motif, interesting rhythm. Let's try that. I did it, submitted it with the last 40, and it got called, and they said, we love this. And I said, that's beautiful. Like, you know, say it again. I love it. I love that you love this. And then they said, well, okay, well, we're going to take this and we're going to try to sell it forward and see what happens. And I'm thinking, great. Well, I'm looking at, property prices and cottages. And the funny thing was, as it was a good experience, mind you, doing this, because you really push yourself. At the end of the day, they said, we love it. We're going to keep it. But I don't think we're ready for mnemonic. And I said, yeah, but you're not. And they said, we're not ready for it. We're going to keep this on file. It's something that we're interested in. Maybe we can start the whole process again another time, but we just thought we could see if we got something, and we got something, so we're happy. Well, how many do you think I did?
You've named like 30, 40, 20, so you got to have over 100.
Yeah.
Yeah.
138.
Wow.
And usually like every 10 was a complete reboot. Like, like just floss your brain out, nothing left. I'm coming at it like completely blank. Now, the plus side of that is when somebody calls me and says, listen, you mnemonic for a thing. I was like, yeah, do I have a mnemonic for you?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to send you 500 of them. Okay.
I'm going to wait till tomorrow so you think I actually created it, but I'm just pulling it out of the drawer.
Yeah, but you know what? Some of the best things come out of some of my favorite tracks I've written are in my stock library. The things that I sit back and go, that one actually felt good because I got something out of my system that I think really works. But then, for one reason or another, you have to kind of go back and like, yeah, it was too much. But for me, it was like, perfect.
Well, I mean, that's the thing where with our business relationship over the years, it's worked out in the sense of, because I know you have that, I'm able to call you up and say, what do you got that will fit this thing that I have zero budget for? And I can't afford to hire you to create something, but do you have something that's just sitting there? And so you get, you'll put together a little folder of 10 items or whatever, send it over to me. And one of them will inevitably go live and goes out into the world.
Spontaneous music.
Yeah. And so it is something that and the thing is that you get to choose what 10 go into that folder that you send me. So there are 10 things that you like. There are 10 things that you have created that have not made it through to final for some reason. And so it's kind of a win-win in that way, right? It's like I get a great piece of music that fits what I need, and you get to see something come to life, and it's always
it's like
fun.
standing with the fly.
Yes,
fly.
it's free.
Do
in
your
the
thing.
world.
That's what you were born to do.
You were born to entertain.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's really cool. So, what would be some advice that you'd give somebody starting out?
Well, obviously playing an instrument is really important. And having a passion just for like some people write music and it's completely technology based, loop based, and they're not traditionally trained instrumentalists and musicians, and they're just kind of doing things that's happening in a linear plane in the computer, and it's totally valid because there's guys out there that don't know the difference between C major and vitamin C.
Right.
And you really don't have to. You don't have to. I mean, it certainly helps depending on the style of music you're writing. If you're writing orchestral music, you should have a fairly solid understanding of how these things fit together to get you the results you want. But in certain styles of music, you can do incredible things just by process.
All right.
But the important thing is get into whatever you're going to do, be in love with what you do, and if you're going to choose, if I heard this somewhere just not so long ago, where a guitar player was asked about being in the music industry and like as a career choice, and he said if you have a choice of music and something else, do something else. Because it's the people that are doing the music that have no choice, because that's what they do.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's
like that. That's kind of paraphrasing, but that kind of says like like this is what I do, and when I was a kid, I used to do this as a hobby, and it like I said, I've been very lucky that I've met the right people in the right order who believed in me, and liked the noise that I was making, and made it possible for me to make a lot of good noise.
Yeah, because I mean, when I think of you, I go like, I can't see you doing anything else. Like what? Like could you, if you weren't doing this, can you think of something else that you would do?
Not so much.
Yeah, like this is just who you are. So that is a great quote, right? You're doing the music because you can't. It's not that you can't do anything else. That's
well. So, here's another thing. I know we're probably wrapping up, but there's another couple dads in the neighborhood that are creative. They work for agencies and work for themselves, and we call ourselves the Layabout Dads, because when our kids were younger, we'd be taking our kids to school. We would be showing up at weird times. Other parents would see us having brunch during times when most people are at work, and I used to describe us as being, we've gone feral, like we're feral parent, like we've been unemployed for so long that we're unemployable, just because what, I have to wear a shirt to work. It's not going to work. It's my terms or nothing. It would be very hard to be in a working situation in an office, and of course I could do it. But I think
you make that sound like yeah, I laugh because I go, no, I don't think you could.
I don't think I can do it. It's just,
well, it's just funny when you say like, we're these dads, and we've been unemployed, but you haven't been unemployed. You've been fully employed in a career.
We don't have a real job,
but you don't have a defined job that society goes, oh, he has a 9-to-5 job and he works for this company, and you can put a label on that person.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is cool. Which keeps you hustling, because you are your own boss. And anytime, you think you want the freedom of having your own company, as soon as you do, you realize you're an absolute slave.
Yeah.
That you have to be there. You're in charge of everything, including taking care of your brain and making sure that, you're staying stimulated, that you've got new things coming into your world that pique your interest, that make you want to sit down and think, how does this thing work? And you're playing around with it, and then start hitting new things that you never even thought possible, just because a new little piece of gear came into your room.
Mm-hmm. And so is that how you keep your brain fresh? Is through new things? Is that your go-to? Like the Filipino, instruments and these types of things that you need to stimulate yourself with?
I think it's helpful to be in a room or in a place where there is a lot of resources that you can go on to, that your writing suite, the things that you have in your magic box of tricks, can help you change gears very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And, it takes the pressure off of like, well, how am I going to do that? Well, there are ways to get out of it. I also find, because of the way my brain works, that it was described to me. I looked into this years and years and years ago. I mentioned it earlier about cognitive disinhibition, which just is a way how your brain filters things in a way that's not typical of most people.
Mm-hmm.
And it allows to, if you can imagine, while you're working on a piece of music, or let's turn it into a meal, you have 6 burners in front of you, your mind can be drifted to the 8th burner or the 7th burner that has something that's not quite related, but might be just enough that if you happen to dip into it, you could bring something that's kind of on the outside of your working memory and bring it in so you actually can use it. And really just it's an inability to focus properly.
Yeah.
Really, that's kind of part of things. This your focus can drift into areas where your inspiration can come very quickly.
Right.
There's a lot of it online. It was interesting. I had no idea what it was until somebody told me, and then I did a little research and I saw some magazines that talked about it, and I was like, oh gosh.
Yeah, I use running for that. Like I like to run, and I learned years ago my creative process kicks in when I'm not thinking. So if I'm out on a run and I'm looking at, the lake, or I'm looking at, people and cars and grass and trees, all of a sudden, whatever problem I was trying to solve, whatever thing I needed to come up with pops into my brain. Mm-hmm. And so I could spend, 10 hours at the office struggling over the blank page, trying to figure out what to come up with. Or I could just go out for a 20-minute run and I'll have my answer.
Yeah. You know what I find, this is kind of a running joke around here, but I've always, like I have a collection of kind of B movies.
Right.
That are, they're okay. There's nothing wrong with them. They're just not, wow movies. But a lot of them have just kind of like, you want to look at it, I kind of have these like kind of, oh gosh, why would they do that? Or have these, and I get pulled away from what I'm doing for just long enough that I can kind of reset my angles on this, take a look at it, and I come back. And quite often, by just turning my head away from my computer screens or the instrument for a minute or 2 minutes, I can come back and be very objective about creative decisions and go, that's not what I meant. And often there'll be something in its place.
Yeah.
And it's just being, of course, not having a very good focus is not a good thing, especially if you're trying to be employed. But coffee helps with that. But like having distractions that are just set at the right frequency, that they allow your brain to fade in and out of the process. Because once you actually lock into something, everything else just disappears.
Right.
And when you've got the cell, once you have the bulb has gone off, the aha moment, once you have that, then everything like just fades away and you go forward, and then you get in trouble because you missed dinner because you just spent 6 hours in a row with headphones on because the idea was that good and you couldn't stop.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a great place to get to, because then it's not working. It's not effort. It's just pure creativity. It's pure producing something. Right?
And something gets done.
Yeah.
It gets done, and especially for longer format things where you need longer cues and stuff like that. It's just like when you have a moment where it's just all flowing because you struggled through all that pushing and pulling, and then suddenly, poop, there it is.
Yeah. You were sharing with me before we started recording a funny thing that happens with your auto correct in your spelling when you're sending back things like sound effects.
Serious? Oh gosh. Okay. I don't know if this gets me in trouble or anything, but it's one of these things that's really funny. I was just working on a project recently, and I don't know why it changed over. It's probably my own fault. But a lot of times in the industry, when you're doing one of the things that you do is, of course, music, and you do mixing, and you do sound design, which is replacing sounds or augmenting sounds in the program to make it sound and look more authentic. And you can be called, the short form is SFX, or just FX. If you call it SFX, it's special sound effects, I guess. And a lot of times somebody will say, take a look at this. Can you put some sound effects on it to try to smooth it over so we can present it so that it looks a little more cohesive and sells a little bit better? And I'll say, sure, I can put some sound effects on it, or SFX if you like, if that's me. And I was just recently working on a project, and a lot of times while you're working on something else, at the corner you get notification and they say, how are the sound effects coming? And I said, listen, I'm just going to throw some heavy SFX on it and send it your way. I'm sure they'll find the SFX are great. It's going to be good. They're really going to help you sell this through. And then there's a long discussion, a couple of emails, and then you look back at one of them, and you realize that your spell correct for some reason has spell correct SFX into SEX. and you're like having a moment looking at this going, I said, I sent this. This went to somebody. And I'm like, how long has that been going on? Oh no. And so I'm like going back and I'm saying, yeah, I'm going to throw some quick sex at this. I'm sure the sex will be great. So just tell them if there's any kind of sex they want to change, just let me know. And I had this moment. I said, well, it's out there. That's the way this goes now. He knows. It's embarrassing, but it's like, there's spell correct working for you.
Well, it's funny because, as a sort of, chief creative officer, I work, and I worked with so many different creative people. And so people that don't do that would always ask me like, what's it like, or how do you manage, or how do you work with creative people? And I used to always use you as an example. And I'd say, well, let me tell you about Eddie, because, Eddie's our composer and he creates all this amazing stuff for us. And I basically let him run with his ideas, and I have no idea what he's saying back to me. Like, he'll come back to me with an email with a bunch of, hey, I'm going to try this and I'm going to do that and I'll move this here and I'll get that and I'll do a little this and I'll do a little that. And I'll just go, sounds great. And I'll have no idea, because you're using all sorts of meta language and music language and things that I'm not aware of.
That's a technique.
Yeah, it's a technique to get a yes. And so then I would just let you do your thing, because I always knew that what you were going to do was going to turn out to be great. And if it wasn't, I could get in at the end and nudge it a little left and a little right. But I didn't have to understand what you were saying. And so what I would say to people is like, with creative people, you have to just let them run with it, because they know what they're doing. They, especially someone like yourself who's been doing it for 25 years, you know what you're doing. And so, like, you could see getting that email going, I'm just going to throw some sex at it. And you'd be like, okay, whatever you do.
I'm going to throw some sex at it. So I'll be busy for a little while, yeah. But when I'm done, I promise you those sound effects are going to be great.
Yeah. They're going to love it once I get some sex on this. So like, to me, I could see getting those kind of emails and just going like, oh, whatever. It's Eddie speak.
Yeah, it's funny. And that's how I say, that's me.
Yeah.
What I do, I'm sorry. I make no apologies. You know what you're dealing with. Deal with me.
Yeah, no, it's funny. Those types of stories. Yeah, it's a lot of times in the creative process, it's not how you get to the end, it's that you get to an end, and that journey. I used to say, when we would be pricing things, and you alluded to it earlier where you were telling a story about, spending 2 days working on something to then come up with something that you can finish the job in 2 hours now. You have to take into account, if a creative person has to go to the coffee shop and stare at his navel and look at the butterflies, and he spends 8 hours, what looks like not being productive, but then in 20 minutes creates something. It didn't take 20 minutes. It took the 8 hours and 20 minutes, because that process is required to get that great end result. And that process might look not productive to somebody who's not, who's more, black and white or process driven. And they'll go like, oh, no, they just sat in the room and they wasted 8 hours, and then they came up with it in 20 minutes.
Gosh, it's like somebody walks into my studio, I'm working, and they're looking at me going, oh, you're watching Roadhouse again. I said, that's right. It's a Roadhouse kind of day. Works every time. I mean, I'd like to thank you for having me on the show. So it's funny when you sit back and you actually start talking about what you do, you actually start to really see what you do.
Yeah.
Taking inventory of some of the things that you've come across in your travels and experience. And the funny thing about it is I've been doing it for so long, and it's kind of like a hobby almost, even though it's what I do to pay for things in our house. Mm-hmm. But it's almost, it's a part of me. I'm actually, the stress that's involved, which I know can be extremely high. And there's a lot of times where you get lost in the process just because of deadlines crushing down. But the fact is, sometimes we're at our best when we have that crush on and all guns firing, and you realize, I got to come up with something, and that's when you fall back on all the things that you've collected and the things that are you, and the things, the buried melodies that are in the box at the back mm-hmm. of your head, and suddenly a couple things happen, and then it becomes a lot of fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
A lot of fun. And then you look at it and you go, I can't believe I get paid for this.
Yeah, I get to do this. I mean, I always suffered from, especially when you're in the advertising business, everybody wants to know, what are you working on? Like, or what have you done that I would recognize? Like, tell me the Super Bowl commercial you did, or tell me something that's out there that I'm going to be able to point to and say, oh, my friend did that, or, my relative did that. And so much of what we would do, is sort of like a little bit under the surface, and it's not, like there's the type A advertising that everybody sees, and then there's the type B advertising, which is the bulk of the advertising out there. That it has to be directed specifically at you, and so we did a lot of work on things where people would say to me like, what are you working on, and I'd forget. Like I would be like, because I'm only thinking about what I'm working on right now.
Mm-hmm.
So I can tell you the 4 or 5 projects I'm working on, or the 7 or 8 clients I'm focused on right now, but I can't tell you the 20 or 30 or 50 that I've worked on over the last 25 years. And then when you sit down in these kind of situations and you actually talk about it, you start to realize, oh wow, like there's a lot of stuff that I've done, or a lot of things that I've been involved in. And that's the part of I think the creative journey that's so fascinating. It's when you look back over a period of time, you're just like, wow, I've been really fortunate to be involved in so many things.
Mm-hmm. I love that feeling when it always comes back to the learning.
Yeah.
To be in a situation and go, okay, great, like I've got this covered. But even within that, you can work something in that's new, something that, you can have that worked out so well. Awesome.
Yeah.
That's part of the game for me.
Yeah. It's one of those, well, because you're also starting at zero, right? You start at the blank page.
Yeah. Well, the good thing about longer format things that, like episode cartoons and series is that, it's more filmic in a sense as how you treat the music. You have a theme, you develop themes for the characters.
Right.
So, it's like the old fashioned way, which is fun. It's actually really fun because, the characters on scene, they're upset. So you take their theme, you turn it into something that's a little more emotional, but there's the theme. And then they're talking about somebody else who's not on theme, but suddenly their theme appears and suddenly they're in the scene, but they're not in the scene. and it's fun. It's kind of like watching, like the old style films, scoring, and it's exciting, when you get to do that. And also it helps guide your process because if you're going to play that game, that those themes need to recur. They are going to be part of the tapestry that drives the movie or whatever it is you're working on forward. When you're working on a commercial for a car manufacturer, there's probably going to be a story. It could be a joke, and then so it's a wrap up. But there's generally a story, and if you're scoring it, it's kind of the same idea, but you don't get the benefit of developing anything significant because after 30 seconds, everybody goes home.
Yeah, or the next one starts.
Exactly. So that's always like one of the things. Like it's always nice to be able to get that extra exploration, but of course you have more time. There's obviously more money too. So
do you have a hero? Is there somebody in this industry that you admire or you're a fan of?
Like there's a lot of artists that I listen to. I'm a huge fan of music anyways. I have a couple of teenage daughters that listen to a lot of modern music. I'm always looking for modern music. Like I'm first off, like I'm like music is my hero. I hear things and I like all kinds of different things. I hear people doing things that are very interesting. In most cases, when I hear something that's interesting, I immediately make a note of it because suddenly it's like, well, that kind of got me going. Maybe I should kind of see what that's all about. And, maybe that's something I can throw into my bag of tricks. Not necessarily just rip off the notes or anything, but just the sound combination, the instrument, like what was that? What synth was that? I love that beat. That groove was crazy. You get excited about stuff. As far as filmic composers or other guys doing kind of like as if like I'm not really on the same level as someone like Hans Zimmer.
Right. Yeah.
But I was kind of surprised, and I mentioned this earlier, that, I got on these masterclass, and which I'm a huge fan of. Like, you get these A-listers that are really doing a great job of really just breaking down their art for you. Steve Martin was really funny too. But, I was watching the Hans Zimmer one, and as I was listening to him, I was saying, I'm loving listening to this, because he's complaining about all the same things that I'm complaining about. He is talking about all his same fears, all the same trappings, all the same workarounds that you kind of end up figuring out over time and through trial and error. And then suddenly, you're realizing the thing I guess that I liked most about it was, and I did draw a lot of inspirational ideas from it. Like, it's like, oh yeah, I could give that a try. I could give that a try. But the fact is, it's nice to feel somebody on that level that's contributing music to everything right now, like his hot hand in Hollywood, that he's not really, he's kind of seeing it from the same angle.
Yeah, he doesn't have, there's no shortcuts, there's no cheat sheets, it's all the same work.
Yeah, and obviously, like, it's a different situation too, because of budgets and the availability of everything, and a writing crew, people that are helping you get your ideas out to, it's just nice to have a team.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's cool. Oh, I love that when you said music is my hero. That's so cool.
Yeah. I always kind of just pictured myself as, sitting around and just hitting it until the right sound comes out.
Yeah. Yeah. Which takes you full circle back to when you were a kid, right? Trying to figure it all out.
Pots and pans.
Yeah. So, Eddie, thank you so much for being on Listen In. It's been really great chatting with you and hearing some of your stories and going a bit down memory lane.
Thank you, Brian. It was a pleasure to share.
Yeah. Well, take care.
Thank you.
Well, that's another episode of Listen In. Thanks for being. Please subscribe, leave comments, or head on over to our website at listeninpod.com. That's listen with 2 N's, pod.com, where you'll find episode notes, links to anything that we talked about in this episode, and you can connect with us about being a guest on Listen In.